Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to Remaking the Economy, Organizing and Wealth Building in Communities of Color. I'm Steve Dubb, Senior Editor and Director of our Economic Justice Program here at Nonprofit Quarterly, coming to you on Earth Day from Boston on land historically stewarded by the Massachusetts Nation. For this webinar, I'm honored to introduce our expert panelists who are Lorena Andrade, Director of La Mujer Obrera, a group started by Chicanas in 1981 that operates two social enterprises while organizing for environmental justice in the Chamasal neighborhood of El Paso, Texas. I'm also joined by Pamela Standing, co-founder and director of the Minnesota Indigenous Business Alliance, which supports Native businesses across the state, and Ellen Vera, director of co-op organizing at Co-op Cincy in Ohio, which has helped organize co-ops in Cincinnati while also supporting a national cohort of childcare co-ops in Santa Ana, California, Jackson, Mississippi, and Springfield, Massachusetts. A few notes. First, we're very excited to take your questions. So we'll start with some slides and questions, and then we'll get to your questions as quickly as we can. Please enter your questions in the question box at the bottom of your screen, and I'll share as many as I can. Second, we will be sharing the slides and recordings after the webinar. So please don't ask, will I get slides and recording? You will. Please also feel free to join the conversation via social media. We have the hashtag Rebuild the Economy. One last thing before getting to our panel, I would like to acknowledge the support of Donor Perfect, which is sponsoring this webinar. Donor Perfect offers a donor management and fundraising system that's used by over 50,000 nonprofit professionals nationwide that helps nonprofits gain and retain donors, simplify their daily work, and grow the community that champions their cause. You can learn more at www.donorperfect.com. Thanks for joining us. And there'll be a survey after this webinar. Please complete it. And with that, we'll begin. And I'll begin with Lorena. And Lorena, you have a 40-year experience at La Mujer Obrera in El Paso. What have been some of the central learnings from that experience?
Well, hi, good afternoon, everyone. In our organization, it's called, like I said, Mujer Obrera, and it means woman worker. So at the beginning, what we were doing was organizing the women garment workers here in El Paso, Texas, and what was called the garment industry, the garment district of El Paso. And it was in one of the original Mexican neighborhoods here, which we're right up against the border wall, just so kind of get a sense of where we are. And we're on the border with Ciudad Juarez. So in El Paso, the women organized La Mujer Obrera to fight for our rights, or, well, there's not a lot of labor rights in Texas where we are. So a lot of it has to do with organizing and making sure that we demanded certain things within the garment industry. For example, we were fighting the sweatshops, and so we needed to make sure that we organized to ensure that women were getting paid for working. Eventually, also, the North America Free Trade Agreement passed. That was one of the most devastating things to happen to our community and to the communities in Mexico as well. And we began also then to from there, and we always had this idea that we should not only do immediate activism, but also what is our proposal as women, right? That our identity can't be that we're an infinite source of cheap labor, but what is it that we would like our community to look like? According to the powers that be, it should be to serve the needs of industry, and we felt that it should really speak to the needs of our community, of our families, and of the women and their families. And so after, so we've always had these ideas of how do we bring people together? How do we do it around food and children and festivals and celebrating who we are as a people? And that has always been important. And so we kind of put that into, after a lot of organizing, we're able to draw down some resources so that we can open our social enterprises, which one is our restaurant called Café Mayapan, where we serve our fronteriza or border food. And it's more like a community center more than a restaurant and more than a business itself. And then we also have our daycare center where we provide where we also, the original idea at that time was to do job training and to be able to provide jobs for workers. And then we also started what we call a Lumetic trading company. So we helped develop a network of Indigenous women's cooperatives in Mexico. And then we import those and we sell them here, because it was also asking the question about how do women on both sides of the border affected by NAFTA, the rural communities, the Indigenous communities, and the women workers on this side kind of support each other. And so that was very important. It's always a lot of questions. So like I said, at the beginning, it was about providing jobs and development, because that's what the funding said. But really, the way that we organize it is, how are we going to organize to change the relationships within the economic projects that we have? That's really the question. How do we change our relationship with our children? How do we provide a better space for them in the daycare? How do they understand that? How do we not take away the idea that they're part of nature and they're part of a community? And what does that look like? And as well as our food, how do we explore all the different varieties of foods that there are in Mexico, and what does that look like in a border community, as well as the different festivals that we provide to the community as well. So everything that we do in our social enterprises is about protecting and defending space, fighting for space, protecting it, so that we have the opportunity to think and plan and implement our vision of what community looks like. And the social enterprises allow for that, and also the protection of our community so that it's not gentrified.
Great, thanks, Lorena. Pamela, can you introduce yourself and also talk about how Minnesota Native communities are using Buy Native and co-op strategies to build economic prosperity in Indigenous communities?
Good afternoon, and we're really happy to be here. So we want to thank Nonprofit Quarterly for inviting us. And we serve the 11 tribal communities in Minnesota, plus the urban communities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth, and Bemidji. So we're statewide in scope. And what we've been doing is, one of the things that came out of listening sessions several years ago was the need for a Buy Native. And because our communities are so small and we're so far apart from one another, even within our own reservation boundaries, we've been working on a Buy Native campaign to really show off the amazing talent that we have in our communities and connect our natives with other natives, but also connect the audience and other people looking for goods and supplies. And we have a Buy Native directory. We work with the messaging that we put out is we want to show people that we're more than just beads and feathers. A lot of times what happens is people pigeonhole Native business and they think, it's just beadwork and feathers. And we're much more than that. We've got really highly educated, talented people. So the kind of the messaging that we're doing is to really get ourselves to start thinking it's our responsibility to invest in our Indigenous economies. If we can't do it, no one can. So it's really about breaking down those barriers and seeing the importance of it. And, so we like to put a human face on the work that we're doing. The other piece that we do is we've been doing a series called Reimagining. And we ask people, what are they trying to reimagine about their business? And I think the next slide shows an example of that. And so this is Melvin and Madonna Yawaki. They are in broadband, and they've been putting broadband all around the country and on other tribal communities. But they don't see it as a divide. They see it as an opportunity. And so because one of the things, we are the worst in the country with access to broadband. So it's about really putting just a small image, but showing what people are doing in our communities. We have solar, we have the arts, we just have this amazing breadth of business. Next slide, please. And so this is some of the messaging. We're talking about how do we build economic sovereignty. And it's really about when we look local, when we look within our communities, what we're doing is we're building lasting cultural, social, and financial prosperity for our nations and our citizens and for our families. And so that's, those are the areas that we're working in. And we do training. I mean, we do so much more. And we published the very first cooperative development guide for Indigenous communities. And we interviewed Native cooperatives around the nation and also up in Canada. And so we're also part of a partnership with SIPI and University of Wisconsin and Canada. And we're doing a really amazing research project to really show what's happening with cooperative development. We're seeing a new cooperativism that's emerging in our tribal communities. And people are really using the co-op model to decolonize and also to bring language and cultural values back into the work that they do every day. So these are the things that we're working on. Thank you.
Great, and thanks so much, Pamela. Ellen, I wanted to pass the baton to you and introduce yourself and talk about how Co-op Cincy is using co-ops to build wealth in communities of color, both in Cincinnati and beyond.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thanks everybody for having us here today. Next slide, please. So I'm Ellen Vera. I'm one of the co-founders of Co-op Cincy, and we are a nonprofit that creates and supports a network of worker-owned businesses with the goal of creating an economy that works for all, but especially focusing on our communities that have been most historically disenfranchised. So you can see here we have 8 cooperative businesses and organizations that we've been working with and creating to date. And we have multiple programs that we use to really try and target these programs to the folks in our community that are most in need. So the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the first strategy that we use is really around helping different communities within Cincinnati and beyond to start new co-op businesses. We have a program that is a co-op development boot camp, about a 3-month program. And we help people walk through step by step from their business idea to really create that business plan and test, their market, test their product, and really provide one-on-one technical assistance. I think this picture itself is a really great example. We have, programs that are very much targeted at different communities in Cincinnati. So this is a refugee-based program. And so we, out of this, we've had co-ops such as Bhutanese Bari, which is a grocery delivery service that's delivering groceries to folks in their community who don't have access to, cars and their grocery store in their area had closed down. So these are the types of things that when folks, contact us, they can go through and we can take multiple groups at a time through a step-by-step process to really help them collectively come up with a good business idea and test it and get it ready for launch. The other piece that really supports this and makes this possible for folks in the community is we have a loan fund that can help them capitalize once they've gone through the process. I think another way that we're really trying to target these services to the folks who need it the most is that we'll, have certain themes for a lot of these classes. So right now we have one that's targeted at Black co-op entrepreneurs called Power in Numbers, and have, 5 different businesses led by actually mostly Black women who are also going through this process to come up with their business ideas. But this is the first way that we really try and do it. So if you want to go to the next slide. The next piece is really working with existing businesses. So we know that, a lot of people talk about the silver tsunami or, just the numbers of baby boomers that are being retiring in the next 10 to 15 years. And so in the next 10 to 15 years, we have about $10 trillion in wealth that is transitioning in this time frame. And so this could be, a crisis or it can be an opportunity. And so we work directly with business owners and really try to target these services either at business owners of color or at businesses that have a lot of workers of color or other disenfranchised backgrounds. And then we help these business owners to walk step by step through the possibility of selling to their workers. So many times we know that 2/3 of our small businesses are owned by baby boomers, and 80% of those folks don't have a succession plan. And so many folks don't know that this is an option. And so, it's really important that we're trying to help people with that succession planning and who's going to care more about that business staying strong and preserving the legacy in the community than the folks who work there. So this is the second way that we really try to preserve jobs, create, wealth for these different communities, is by anchoring and transitioning these workers and the ownership these businesses over to the workers themselves. And the third strategy, with the next slide, please. Our third strategy is supporting these businesses. So, it's really great to have like a business program where you have to go through in a 3-month process and develop a new business. But we know that that's just the beginning of the work, and that it's extremely challenging to bring a business to life. And so, and then once it's brought to life, that there's so much that has to be done to really help it thrive. And so that's one of the ways that I think Co-op Cincy really stands out, is that we help for all the businesses that are in our network. We help provide wraparound services. And so that means weekly team meetings with their management teams, helping them, reach their goals, helping them really build that co-op culture. And so we feel like this really makes it more accessible to more, communities. So many times, when we think about entrepreneurship, the folks that are able to be more successful are those that have, already more privilege and more wealth. And so by having this type of wraparound, services, we're able to kind of really give these folks the best chance that they can to get these businesses to be successful and thrive. And so some of the other pieces that we do include, financial literacy. So I think one of the ways that, we really measure success is by being able to have everybody inside that co-op, really be able to talk to one another. So those are the ways that we're trying to really help make sure that we're lifting up all the communities in Cincinnati and beyond through co-ops. So thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. So I want to bring everyone together. Let's see if we can do that on screen. Great. And, I wanted to ask, I think, to get all of you involved, and you can take in, whoever wants to jump in first can jump in. You're trying to combine in your work in different ways, both community organizing and community economic development. And how do you define success when you're doing your work?
I'll go ahead and go. It's really about building trust and establishing relationships. If you don't have that trust and people don't feel like they're valued or their voice is important, you're not going to get anything off the ground. People are going to be resistant. The other thing is listening to what the community needs and what they want. And we've found that our communities are the most informed source of what they need, and not to have someone come in and tell them what is a good idea. So what we try to do is provide lots of tools, because you can't build a house with just a hammer. So you've got to have some high-tech stuff. You got to have some low-tech. You have to know how to do math. And so we try to share a lot of different tools that people can use and be practical and meet each person where they're at.
Great, thanks, Lorena.
Yeah, so for us, we also organize in the community to defend our community. So we have a group, several committees and groups of families and women, specifically women and youth, that are organizing against, for example, the diesel contamination because of the international, because of the bridges, the bridge that we have here, and all of that traffic is in front of our high schools and our elementary schools. Or an open metal recycling facility behind another one of our elementary schools. And that's something that we're trying to defend our community against. Also them the school closures and then shutting down our housing projects and pushing people out of our community, because like I said, we were garment workers. They defined this as a garment industry. It's no longer the garment industry. They no longer need us. And we believe that it's important for us to say we choose here to build community. We want our relationships with the earth and with each other in this space. And so with that organizing also comes the celebration of who we are. So we're defending against these, this thing called progress defined by them, is that we're also celebrating that our community exists, that we have these relationships, that there's knowledge in our community, that there's art and music and knowledge of our ancestral foods that we're putting into practice that are not only being spoken about, but that there's a practice in our community of this. And so that's what informs our businesses, and hopefully it goes back and forth. What does our practice as women in these social enterprises, in how does that inform our community organizing, and how is it what we're learning in our community also inform the work that we're doing in our social enterprises?
Great, thanks. Ellen?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, were we asking another question?
Oh, I wanted to get you to weigh in, but also there was a question that's sort of a follow-up, but maybe the others will also want to jump into, but it is like, it's the metrics word and the impact word and how you communicate that. So how do you, so you can just talk about how you define success yourself and then maybe jump into that a little bit.
Yeah, and I wanted to build off of what both Lorena and Pamela was saying. I think that, we, and this is also kind of maybe how we define success, but it is about how do we respond to some of our most pressing needs in our communities and the types of jobs that our communities need. I think we see the work that we do as going hand in hand with our social movements and that community organizing, so that economic development is still, intricately tied, because, within our co-ops, we're trying to create the best types of jobs that we can. And if we're not directly connected to movements that are trying to push up the standards in those industries, there's only so much that we can do. So all of our co-ops are directly connected to the labor movement. But, a lot of our co-ops are also trying to address issues like, food insecurity, food justice, environmental justice. And so are directly connecting with those movements, movement around good universal childcare. So I would say that we try to tie what we're doing directly connected to that as much as possible. And that is definitely one of the ways that we measure success. And I think also building on what Pamela was saying is it's also about being able to truly build cooperative culture and do that cooperative education more broadly, that making sure that people, that this, cooperativism is something that is more well-known and more, utilized and an option for businesses in terms of setting them up and for existing businesses. So I think that that's a key piece for us, is that education piece, but also really, are we truly creating family sustaining jobs that we want to see?
Great, thanks. Pamela, I was going to ask you, what are strategies that have proven effective in helping create co-op development infrastructure in Indian country that speak to Indigenous values?
Well, one of the first things that we've done is we had to go through a lot of work just to identify the Native cooperatives that were here in the US. I started with a list of about 150. By the time I got done, we had like 30 cooperatives, but there's a huge movement of cooperative growth happening right now in the country. So we're also working with different communities. We're working on food hubs, because most of our reservations are considered food deserts. And so we're looking at how can we get food. And one of the biggest problems that's happening in the rural communities is like Cisco, they won't drive to drop off food. And so communities are having to pay FedEx to deliver groceries, to their store. There's a movement right now to do something with the post office in North Dakota. And so how we can get food to our communities in a good way. So our communities are looking at growing food. The other thing that we're doing is by having examples of other cooperatives that people can go to and listen to. And so, for instance, the Tohono O'odham has a food producers co-op in Arizona. We're going to be getting them in front of all these other communities that want to start a food producers co-op, because a lot of times people can relate to people that look like them, or they understand the intricacies of working on a reservation and what a sovereign nation is, and some of the real benefits of it, and then some of the areas that are challenging, trying to get business launched in communities. So that for me has been one of the biggest ones, is getting other cooperatives in front of our audiences so that they can hear from them and learn from them. And so that's been a real big, that's really been helping. getting that information out, and then just listening to the communities, what they want to do. And sometimes they have to scale back. And how do we help them? How do we walk alongside them while they're working through that process and being flexible?
Great, thanks, Pamela. Lorena, I wanted to ask you, I mean, La Mujer Obrera has been nationally recognized for some of your equitable food development work. So, you know, what does that entail? You know, how are you implementing the principles of equitable food development in El Paso?
So we are also part of the EFOD, which is an Equitable Food Oriented Development. So it's a group of organizations, I suppose, like the ones that we're talking with today, that we not only develop food, social enterprises around food, but it also is related to building community, and that we can't just focus on one thing. We also have to defend community. We have to create community, and those things are also important. So I think, and those are the basic principles that is involved in EFOD. And so there is a lot of organizing around getting funding for our type of work. That is not just we do this or we do this or we do this, or you just do a business and how many numbers can you turn out, but also how does that impact the community? How is our community involved? And how does our food work and our economic work really in defending community and defending the peoples that live within our communities as well. So I think that's why we feel like we found a good place in with those organizations, because we can share the difficulties of getting funding for our work, the difficulties of surviving with these variety of ideas. I think one of the things that is difficult, that is really important for us, is to have time within our social enterprises specifically to ask questions, to rethink the way that we work, to do it collectively, right? So if we have a daycare, it is about providing daycare services, but it's also about asking questions of, like I said, about how we redefine our relationships with our children. What is it that our children need? Because the education of our children, maybe the 1, 2, 3s can be, you know, we fight to defend schools, but the spirit of our babies is our responsibility, the community that we can create around them, right? And so how do we do that as well? So I think those are the things that sometimes take a lot more, not sometimes, that take a lot more time to build and to create that base of relearning how to work collectively, being okay with asking these questions, thinking outside of this little box that they have us in, and really open our mind to what is our cultural knowledge, and how do we ensure that we can continue to implement that, and how do we reshape again our relationships. And I know it may sound like broad, but to us they're very practical questions. They're really practical questions about how we reshape and how we heal these relationships, whether it's working on the land, whether it's defending the environment, whether it's playing with our kids and our daycare, what spaces we provide for them, what food we serve to our community. All of those are everyday practices that we feel that make them different from just any business, right? We can all train to work in a business, in a restaurant industry, but when we're working together in our social enterprises, we're really rethinking what community looks like to us. And more importantly, we've defended a space where we can put those ideas into practice, and that we can see them as a living thing, that it's not something that we have to imagine, but that we're working on and living in on a daily basis. And I think that's what's really important about our type of work and the type of work that EFOD does, and what we're learning from everyone else here. So.
Great, thanks, Lorena. And it's a good segue to Ellen, because Ellen, I know you're working with this Co-op U program that's, as I understand it, part of it's a cohort of childcare co-ops that you're helping develop. You know, so how do you do that? And with the issues that Lorena is talking about, the attention to the local communities, which, Santa Ana, California, not the same as Jackson, Mississippi, certainly.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. Right. And so, I think that Co-op U, our co-op development course really developed out of there being such a hunger and a desire to create co-ops. And We were in the beginning only working with one group at a time, whether it be locally or nationally, and just very much limited on, how, the impacts, right, that we were wanting to generate. And so I think what we're really excited about with the Co-op U experience is that we're able to take multiple teams, multiple groups, and now, especially with COVID times, have been, taking multiple groups around the country through at the same time. And I think the way that it is able to be successful, with, working with groups in Santa Ana and Jackson and Springfield is that, what we're giving folks is more tools, right? Like they have to do the work and they go out, it's a very much a practical, hands-on. I mean, it's really based off of what we've learned that's worked and not worked in our own co-op development and in Mondragon's own co-op development, because they've helped us develop this course. But to really say, okay, here are the tools. Now you have to go out to your community and figure out, do you have the market? Do we have the right pricing based off what's going out there? So we really try to focus on giving folks the tools, and then they can adapt that to what's going on the ground in their community.
Great. So I'm going to audience questions. There's quite a few, so thank you. Some great questions here. I'll try to get to as many as I can. One, this may follow what you were saying, Ellen, but there's a lot of people who are interested in knowing if there are resources, toolkits, best practices that, for example, foundations that might want to support co-op organizing can back so that people are able to find the solutions for their communities.
Yeah, well, I would say just speaking from us, yes, excitingly though, it's not completely there yet, but right now we have we've gotten a grant to write up our curriculum in a very kind of, more formal way where we have a facilitator guide and, we're able to help folks do it themselves. So our goal is to have that done by the end of this year, and then hopefully have like a train the trainer next year, so that, more folks can take this to their own communities. And it's not, something that is hamstrung by our capacity. So we have that's going to be coming online really soon. And then we also have, for people that have already formed co-ops, we have a worker owner workbook curriculum that is about, it's a cooperative culture curriculum. So that's something that could be bought online through Lulu. So and there'll be a new, I think our version 2.0 will be out later this year. But yeah, we're constantly trying to think of ways to make this as accessible as possible to as many communities that we can.
Great. And I will mention too that the guide that Pamela put in her slides, we will make that available to attendees afterwards. It's a really good resource. So there's a lot of good resources out there. Let's see, another question. We have a very practical group today. They're asking what mix of funding have you guys brought together? Is it foundations, public money, other? What's the mix look like? We don't need exact numbers, but sort of give people a sense. I'll start with Pamela just to move things around.
We've really been working on that. I'm really proud of it too. So we do a mix of foundation money. We do a mix of private donations and donors. We've been building our donor base and getting people involved. We've started a social media allies program. And so they're helping push our message out. So we have about 349 people that have signed up, and they're using their networks and they're pushing our messages out throughout Indian country, but into non-native communities as well as bringing attention. The other thing that we do is we do contract for fee work. And so we work in other communities, we work on other projects and help them. We add that Indigenous lens to sometimes the work where they're struggling and they're not able, maybe they've been working with some Native communities, but they can't get it off the ground. So we kind of go in as a partner to work with the tribal community and the citizens in the community. And the other thing that we do is we do have some merchandise. So we've kind of, it's along the messaging of Buy Native. And, it's part of our education tools. So those are the things that we've been doing to kind of mix our, mix our wealth and our, mix how we're using our money.
Lorena, anything you want to add?
For us, we the businesses sustain themselves. We don't make a huge profit. We cover costs, and then we separate that from our nonprofit, which is La Mujer Obrera. And then in La Mujer Obrera, we get our resources from foundations primarily for the organizing work and for what we used to call popular education type of work or leadership development, depending on what the term is at the time. And we do that. We specifically did that because at the very beginning, when we started doing this work, we would get a lot of pressure about why were we getting resources for our businesses, right? There was a lot of pushback from that. So to protect ourselves, we made this separation so that we were able to show the business numbers and then our nonprofit numbers. But there was a lot of pushback about us starting these social enterprises at the time. I don't know if it was just the political climate at the time, and there was a lot of pressure that we shouldn't get any funding to begin our social enterprises. So there was a lot of that going on at the time. So that caused us to be able to, that pushed us to do that. And so a lot of our organizing work is through our nonprofits, and then the businesses support themselves in that way.
Great. Ellen, I see you nodding.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar for us. We definitely, get grants through local and national foundations. We also have gotten a really great grant through the federal government, which is how our refugee program runs. Some also private individuals as well. And then I would say, each of our co-ops is their own separate business entity. So, sometimes we partner with them on different grants, but they're also, selling their own goods. And then once they are profitable, they do give a portion back of their profits to the nonprofit. It's kind of a co-op of co-ops is what we're building, but where they can kind of determine where those funds go in terms of supporting the network.
Great, thanks. Another question that comes, this one is about COVID, and the question is really, how have you adopted during the pandemic to reach people to continue to do the power building and organizing in the communities that you serve? Anyone want to take that on?
I can start with that. So on March 20th, I remember that's when we closed our doors because we didn't really know what was going to happen with that. And so that's where we switched over to, we were able to get some resources to buy tablets for many of the community members so that we could begin to have, we got support to have the Zoom program. And so a lot of our meetings at the beginning were like, is everybody on? Can we hear each other? But then we were able to adapt fairly quickly. The community members were able to adapt, whether it was and multi-generational. So from the children, we continue to have workshops, and talks with them and meetings with them, as well as the women in organizing, because the impacts on our community don't stop, right? It almost seems like it got worse about trying to push back on our schools and the health of our community, and we weren't getting answers about what was happening. The food, we needed to have access to food for our community. Those things kept coming, right? About them imposing certain things on our community. That never stopped. So we needed to be able to work through Zoom, and actually through Zoom, a lot of people were able to kind of come in as well that maybe have more mobility issues. They were able to join our meetings because they could join from home as well. So I think that was important too. We felt more comfortable with that. We were able to, it's more difficult sometimes to find agencies here locally in the government, but also we were able to set up different meetings with different people at all times. So we just had to adapt to a different way of meeting, a different way of celebrations, right? So how do you do that same festival and green and food type of environment through Zoom, right? So I think it brought, again, like everything that impacts our community, with a lot of creativity. So this was no different. So at the same time, there were so many difficult things happening in our community. We always make sure that we find that balance of our spirit of celebration and of coming together. So we were able to do that.
Something in our community, Steve, is that most of our Native businesses, they're used to doing face-to-face. It's all about relationship. And so a lot of people have been they've had to work in a different environment, like online. And one of the things with our Native artists, they're trying the economy. And there were no gigs. Everything was shut down. All the conferences, every way that people made money, the big art shows, the art fairs, everything just changed. We had to cancel a lot of events that we had planned because we started trading at the river. And so we had to cancel everything. And one of the things what I have seen that to me really excites me is that we've really been putting the message out. Our people created really intricate trade routes. They were here long before that guy Columbus got lost, and we had these things here, and it was the French traders and the Europeans that took over our really intricate trade routes. But we depended on trade. And I always say we were the first cooperators. Long before the Eurocentric model came out, we were cooperating and working together. And so what we really started talking about is we're just creating new trade routes, but they're virtual. And there was some really resistance in the beginning of doing anything virtually. There was a lot of resistance to it. And so what I've seen is that we've helped a lot of our businesses create a different way of looking at how they do business that will live beyond COVID. And again, to me, it's another tool they can have that can help them market and expand. And so we were able to get some emergency funding. We were able to give funding to the artists to buy supplies. We were able to get people that were willing to come together and work together. We paid for a year's subscription for websites if people were coming together and working together. And we're showing that because I really feel what's really changed. And we were in the middle not only of COVID shutdown, but then we had the uprising in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so it really, it was so powerful. And COVID really shined the light on all the inequities in this country. And then the murder of George Floyd and all the others, it shined an even greater light on systemic racism in our country. And so that's really, for us, it's really created a place to build momentum and to speak out and speak up about those things. But it's been hard on our communities. And also our communities have the highest deaths of any community. So we've really been impacted that way with loss of life.
Thanks, Pam. Anything you want to say about Co-op U and having to switch that over? So, I think COVID definitely accelerated, we were mostly doing Co-op U's in person. So now we can do it fully online, which is, exciting, I think, especially if we're doing more national work. I think in general with the businesses, a lot of our businesses were kind of categorized as essential. When they were, in food, working with children, doing cleaning, things like that. So, they did have to kind of figure out how to make that work and what, safety precautions to put in place. But they all, have done that and, figured out how to keep moving forward and providing the needed services that the community, that they're providing to the community. Great. So another interesting question, all you guys are doing some kind of business support or training as part of your work. And so the question comes up about financial literacy, and often programs are very sort of individually focused, and yet you're doing community supporting businesses. So, how have you had to change sort of the dominant notion of financial literacy when you're providing financial literacy in your programs?
I can speak to our programs. I think we've really, we have had folks in our co-ops that have as a little of the third grade education to folks with a master's degrees. And so we really want to make sure that everyone within the co-op we can tap into everyone's fullest potential and be able to talk about the numbers and what's going on. So I think the ways that we try to approach it is several, but making sure that we're weaving that in, kind of ongoing. It's not like a one-time thing. It's not a 3-time thing. It's something that happens in little bits and pieces, every single week almost, right, as we're working with folks. And we, try to use really kind of clear tools. So, trying to kind of break down, just like with a dollar bill, like how does a dollar bill pass through your co-op? Where does each of that, cents of that dollar go? And we utilize, something that I'm sure a lot of people know on this call, but great game of business. So it's a form of open book management, but that really breaks it down and kind of helps you to create games out of it. But to be able to kind of use that as a way to help people hone in on the numbers that are really, that what they're doing, how that can really affect the bottom line. So those are some of the ways that we really try to break it down and kind of put it into bite-sized pieces and help people from all different walks of life be able to have a conversation together about, the numbers in their business.
Great.
I call it financial education. Because I think when you say literacy, you're assuming someone's not literate. And that's something that's bothered me about financial literacy. And it's usually targeted at communities that have been overlooked. And I feel that a woman with 3 children that's living on a very limited income is probably more financially literate than someone that's making 6 figures, because they know how to put food on the table. They make sure their kids have clothes. They, they have a roof over their head. They pay their light bills. I think when you think of budgeting, they're masters in that, a family taking care of their family. So we work with people to build credit, but what we do is we source them to other Native organizations that work in that area, like for credit building. If there's help that they need with their business, just practical financial education about, taking care of business, knowing how to read all their financials, we help them with that. Great.
Thanks. That's a really important point, Pamela. Lorena, I think this might be, it's a general question, but it is Earth Day, so it's not surprising we got a couple of questions about climate change, and I suppose environmental justice is pretty core to your work. So maybe talk a little bit about some of the environmental justice work that you've been doing, on the border, El Paso.
So here, like I said, we're right on the border, and so a lot of things get dumped here. So for example, we have that open metal recycling facility. We have the diesel trucks constantly going through our neighborhood, even though they're not supposed to. Enforcing, we don't have, again, a lot of regulations to protect our community and the environment. And then the ones that exist are difficult to enforce. Also, the levels are, so if we say, hey, our children, there's lead there's lead in the playground of the school, they're like, oh, it's just a little bit. We get that kind of reaction. Or, they imposed a bus hub right next to inside of our high school. So that's more than 300 buses on a daily, just, warming up, as they say, in the morning, and our kids are breathing all of that in. But hey, what's a little more contamination? So like I said, we're fighting to get rid of those things in our community. But then what is the knowledge that we have as a community to save water, to plant our food? What is it that we're eating that helps also maybe a little bit defend against some of these things that are going on in the environment around us? So how do we have our community gardens so that we're relearning how to have that relationship, how to plant our own food? We don't have access to a lot of like organic food or anything, but we can try to heal the land as well, right? Because there's so much contamination. I mean, literally, like, how do we put more nutrients in the land? And those are all the different questions that we're asking, but a lot of it is based on what is the knowledge that we already carry as a people, and what is the practices that we already have in our community, so that we build from there, and that sharing of that information between community members and the different generations. So how do we create spaces so that we can share those, right? Where we call them tianguis or festivals, but those are the spaces where we could share that information, because we know how to save water. And it might not always be because water is beautiful. It could be like, my water bill's too high, right? things like that. But hey, we start from wherever that we are, and then we build from that knowledge. So that's kind of how we do both. We try to defend against these sources of contamination, but also build on the knowledge that we have as a people to fight against that and to create something different practices.
Great, thanks. This is a question I think for Ellen. So the question is, let me see if I can state this right. What is your business development strategy? Are you looking for businesses that you can convert and you approach them first and find the fit with the people, or do you develop the businesses from scratch, and what's the mix of that?
Yeah, well, we do both. So I would say on our transitions work of transitioning existing businesses into worker ownership, we have two programs. So one is called the Business Legacy Fund, and that is an annual cohort program. So we kind of open up applications in the fall, have businesses apply, and then select a cohort of them to go through like a 6-month process of, assessing the value of their business. Is this the right fit? And then kind of, doing the education on like what is worker ownership, and then getting them ready if they're ready to go to transition to sell to their workers. The second program in the transitions is something actually new that we just got funded that I'm really excited about, where we're going to be doing an acquisition strategy. So we will be taking our fund and we will be actually targeting it. So we will be looking for specific types of businesses that are meeting a lot of our goals around the types of jobs we want to create, the types of communities we want to target, and like kind of the long-term nature of those jobs is what we think is needed. So, and we'll be, partnering with professional managers that will be helping to transition these businesses over the course of potentially a couple of years of training those workers and getting them ready. But excitingly with that one, we don't have to wait for an owner that's just, wants to do this. It's like, we're going to buy your business and then we're going to transition it. So that's on the transitions. In terms of the startups through Co-op U, we kind of put the call out and say, hey, we're going to have a new session of this. People come to us and, based off of what types of things they're looking for, and, in terms of the communities and the jobs. And then, we just help, again, like give them the tools, walk them through the process of coming up with, a strong business plan. We have at times partnered with different nonprofits, with different movements, like, the labor movement and the childcare. Our child work came out of a campaign that was happening with the teachers union in our city and a whole federation of churches. So, sometimes we will actually like be very intentional about the type of co-op that we're trying to create. But it all depends on kind of who in the community, wants to own this co-op, wants to build this thing. And then we partner together to make that happen.
Great, thanks. So there was a question about how do you interact, and this could be for any of you, with state, city, federal officials. Obviously, you all have to interact with government in some way. If you're doing childcare, you're probably interacting with the school at some level, for example, or the churches, but yeah, anyone want to talk about interactions with government? I'm sure you're making demands on city officials from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I don't know that we've done it with great success yet, but I think right now, we've done some partnering with like our city officials around like getting a building for a co-op. We've also worked to try and pass different laws or different policies that would help like a co-op or maybe their industry. Right now we're trying to make the argument to our local officials that like, if we're going to build back better, then like co-ops should be a part of that. So I think, we're definitely having dialogues with our local officials. I know that there's a whole lot of money coming in the States right now. So we have a statewide network of co-op developers. And like we've been having conversations about, and how do we make sure that as we think about building back better on a statewide basis, that like co-ops are in that mix. But I think those are the main ways that we've been trying to interact with our, local officials.
Great. Pamela, you want to say anything about how you interact with tribal governments, for example?
Yes, because we kind of have to straddle two worlds, because we're working with the legislature right now in Minnesota, because we're in a budget biennium, and it's challenging. It's about, again, it goes back to making relationships, and it's the same thing with the tribal leaders. We don't go on tribal land. We respect that's sovereign traditional territory, so we communicate with tribal leaders before we go trouncing around, in their communities. We try to build relationships with all the tribal leaders and tribal governments. We did something a few years ago where we did a partnership with when Mark Ritchie was the Secretary of State. We did a secured transaction, a model tribal secured transaction act, and that was a partnership with Leech Lake, Band of Ojibwe, and the Minnesota State, and to have a portal on the state for tribal transactions to move through. And so we do different things like that. We're working on food laws right now, model tribal food laws that we're sharing with tribes. Again, they have to be the ones that take the lead and adopt. We don't tell them what to do. It's a little bit different than our legislative people. The citizens can go before, like I can go before my tribe and say, I need this, I need you to listen to this. But as me, not being a citizen here in Minnesota with the tribes here, I can't go and tell those. I would never presume to tell tribal leaders what to do, but their citizens can, because they've elected them and they've voted them into office.
Great. So I think I'll ask one last question. We'll go slightly over since we started a couple minutes late, but not a lot. And just give you a chance to talk about what can nonprofits and philanthropy, what role can they play in supporting the type of work that you guys do, not just your own organizations, but groups across the country that are doing similar work?
I think in supporting our work is also being able to see that in our case, that it's long-term work of building community. There's a lot of communication, there's a lot of learning from each other, that it's not always just numbers, because it takes a long time to build and to learn together, right? Because we want it to be something that will continually provide information and practice to building community. I think that's important as well. It's not because we're doing two things at the same time. We're defending from them taking our community in the first place or imposing things on our community, at the same time that we're trying to develop a community that is going to serve our families. But families need to be a part of that process. And that takes time, right? It takes time to figure out what kind of education we would like for our kids and what that looks like and how we interact with that, and what does a better environment look like, and how do we build that, and how do we share that knowledge, and how do we turn that into a collective practice. That collective work and takes a lot more patience and a lot more time, and we're able to produce work, and that's important to be funded, but also this long-term building community work that is not always so flashy. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not always like look at this new business, right? But it's once you have the business, all the internal work and the hidden work that it takes to make sure that it's a project that sustains and nurtures community as well, and that is nurtured and sustained by the community as well. So to be able to have the eyes to see that work and then to fund it, because that's the harder work. That's the more difficult resources to get a hold of, I guess.
Yeah, patience, that's really important. Thanks for lifting that up. Ellen, any last words of wisdom?
I mean, I think building on that, it's that multi-year commitment, because it's not quick work. Yeah, and I think the ability to have a little bit more flexibility too. I think that, trusting that these communities, really know what's needed, and allowing that flexibility in the funding streams to say, okay, we need to pivot. COVID happened, and so we need to change to create a grocery delivery service or whatever that is. I think that's really important.
And Pamela, I think I'll give you the last word here.
Well, because of the uprisings, BIPOC has become this new acronym for everyone. And there's a lot of money that is being earmarked for BIPOC communities. I guess how I feel with foundations is that if you're going to be supporting BIPOC communities and BIPOC organizations, the leadership, the board need to represent the communities that they're serving. I think it's critical. And, that even senior leadership, they need to have a plan in place so that they're bringing the lower paid members of their group up into those positions of leadership so that they really look like the people that they're serving. And I also agree with what both Ellen and Lorena said about the long-term commitment. And the other piece that I see that's really important is with these smaller BIPOC organizations, they need capacity building funding so that they can grow and expand and be able to really meet the needs of their communities. And they're overlooked so many times because they're so small. And these other communities that are serving BIPOC communities, but they don't look like them, they're getting the money. And to stop tokenism on boards. I want to see that stop and quit marginalizing our people and, go, oh, we want diversity. Okay, I got one Black, I got one Hispanic, I got a Native person. We got to quit doing that. And I really feel our funders need to be aware of that practice and watch for it when they're making decisions.
Great. Thanks. So I think we need to wrap up. Thanks to all of you out there for your questions. We got to a number of them, not quite all of them, but thanks so much. I want to thank again our panelists, Lorena Andrade, Pamela Standing, Ellen Vera, also the support from Donor Perfect and the support from you guys who have made this Remaking the Economy series so successful. We will be having another webinar. Look for information coming out on core elements of system change. That'll be coming out on May 20th, so 4 weeks from today. Thanks for joining us at Nonprofit Quarterly.
Steve.